Hello, welcome back to our next installment of Get Busy with Bradley Zink. Uh, Today's show will be discussing issues that have plagued the public school system in California and some of my suggested solutions to um, bringing revenue generation to these schools to make them less reliant on the dependability through the state for funding. Before we get started, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, In the Mid 777, for being our sponsor today and providing us with that music track from their single Resist. Greatly appreciate it, guys, for all of your support for my show and everything you do for the community. Um, Now let's get into the discussion topic today about public school system in California. If we could cue up the education money pick. Um, there's many issues that plague the public school system in California today. One of them is the lack of funding, the amount of money that it truly takes to get a proper education. Uh, with over 6 million, almost 7 million children in the kindergarten through 12th grade public school system here in California, and with the public school systems always getting their budgets cut, seems year after year after year, funding is one of the biggest issues that plagues our public school systems here in California today. If we could bring up the metal detector pick. Another issue that plagues our school systems is safety. With our children being in these schools anywhere from 7 to 10 hours a day, um, their safety is one of our top priorities. Um, Ensuring that they're able to get to school safely, not having any incidences while they're in the hands of our school system trying to get an education. Um, Another issue that we seem to be dealing with today is the dwindling enrollment numbers that we see in our public school system. Last year alone, in 2021, we had a drop of 110,000 enrolled in our public school systems. And with one of the major factors driving funding for the public school system being daily attendance, with a drop of that many students in one school year, you can imagine what the ramifications are for how it affects the funding for year after year after year for our schools. Um, and these are just a few of the issues that are plaguing our school system. And we could spend hours debating and discussing the different topics and bullet points um, that we need to address. But today, to keep it in that 30-minute time frame that we try to keep the show in, I'm going to address funding for the school system. Um, Not just how our public schools receive state and federal aid and funding, grant funding, but also ways that the schools and the school districts themselves in California can generate revenue, increase their fundraising capabilities, and be less reliant and dependable on the funding budgeted for the school through the state every year. Um, if we could first bring up the stadium pick, please. First, I want to cover some of the numbers here for our public school systems in California. The number of teachers in our public school systems in California, 308,000 teachers. Currently enrolled students in the public school system, and that's covering kindergarten through 12th grade, 6.7 million children, spread out across 1,029, that's 1,029 school districts, consisting of over 10,500 schools, public schools in the state of California today. Another number I'd like to point out is California has over 10% of all US Fortune 1000 companies, a total of 118 Fortune 1000 companies to be exact. with a combined revenue of $1.5 trillion. Uh, these companies that are referred to are the companies like Apple, Facebook, Hewlett Packard, Oracle, Adobe, Tesla, Walt Disney Corporation, Cisco Systems. $1.5 trillion in revenue generation from these Fortune 1000 companies. Why I point these numbers out is one of the sources of additional funding for our schools that the state could approach is behested payments. A behested payment, for those that aren't aware of what a behested payment is when a state or local official, elected official, or member of California's Public Utilities Commission solicits a donation to an organization, such as a 501c3, which our public schools are, that's used for legislative, governmental, or charitable purposes. These types of payments are not considered campaign contributions or gifts. While state law limits the amount of campaign contributions and gifts, there are no limits on behested payments. Now, to do a breakdown of how behested payments can help fund our public school system. As I showed you at the beginning of this, the Sophie Stadium picture, selling the naming rights to our football fields of our public schools, our libraries of our public schools, different buildings, our baseball fields on campus. Naming rights is a lucrative business in sports industries. You can see, as an example, they pay in upwards of 25 to 30 million per year just to have the naming rights to a stadium. Now, I'm not expecting any of these Fortune 1000 companies to make such a lucrative offer of millions of dollars in funding to have the naming rights on their local high school football field. But what I propose is $150,000 per year behested payment to obtain the naming rights to the football field. So take, for example, here locally in San Marcos, where I live, one of the multi-billion-dollar companies that we have in town is Hollandia Dairy. And right across the street from it is Mission Hills High School. So I propose having the state, and if elected governor myself, requesting behested payments of these Fortune 1000 companies in the amount of $150,000 a year on a 10-year guarantee to purchase the naming rights to the high schools, middle schools, football fields, baseball fields, soccer fields, like I said, libraries of elementary schools. Some of these companies, their revenue is in excess of $200-300 billion a year. So $150,000 is minimal in comparison to what the revenue generation is. So I propose each of these Fortune 1000 companies in the state of California picking 10 school districts. There's 118 Fortune 1000 companies, 10 school districts each. That covers 1,100 school districts. So like I said, we have 1,029 school districts. So every school district would be covered. At $150,000 each for 10 different school districts, that would be a behested payment of only $1.5 million per year, 10 years guaranteed. Each year between those 118 Fortune 1000 companies, it would generate an additional $177 million of tax-deductible donations that would be additional funding for our public school system. Not only are these behested payments tax deductible for these corporations, but it also gives them high product visibility and increases the community perception of these products. Facebook, Apple, all the ones that I've mentioned earlier could definitely use positive public perception of their companies. And one way to get their name more tied into the communities is through naming rights at our public schools. Um, Another example here in San Marcos is San Marcos High School, where roughly 100,000 cars a week drive by the school. So that would be 100,000 potential customers being a day being exposed to your product name of freeze funding for our schools. Let's take a look now at our second one on the list here, which is if we could queue up the federal money pick, please. Oh, I'm sorry, not the federal money pick. That's my mistake. Yeah, that's the federal money pick. You had it right. Thanks, Joe. As I stated, public schools receive money from both the state and federal government. One of the ways that um, the state and the feds dictate how much money goes to each public school is based on their designation as being a STEM or STEAM school. STEM and STEAM standing for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. One way that the public schools could increase funding for themselves is to be redesignated as a STEM or STEAM school. Now, how can they do that? With California being practically the entertainment capital of the world, we'll take the audio visual departments as an example. If we could bring up the audio visual photo, please. Facilities for audio video production can run in the tens of thousands of dollars a month for rent. A lot of the schools have very large buildings and large amounts, swatches of land that would make it possible to add an additional building where the schools could in turn, at a discounted rate, rent that facility to an audio video production company, a film production company, as just a slight example. Say an audio video production company is paying $10,000 in downtown San Diego for rent for their building. A school could offer the same size facility for them for $5,000 a month, which would generate $60,000 a year in just rent revenue for that particular school. On top of that, for getting such a greatly reduced cut in rent that the audio production company would be spending, they could be offering classes teaching groups of students audio and video production concepts, how to run mixing boards, how to run the software for audio and video production, giving them not only hands-on experience, but also a possible trade that they might want to pursue once they graduate from high school. Then after schools are able to redesignate themselves as a STEM or STEAM school in this fashion, they would be open up to additional not only state and federal funding, but federal grant programs for STEM and STEAM schools, thus drastically increasing the amount of funding for these schools and school districts in California without putting an additional burden on the taxpayers, without being as reliant on the state for their annual budgets for the schools. A third suggestion that I have for being able to increase funding for schools, if we could bring up the concert pick, please. One of the biggest ways that schools fund themselves is through Friday Night Lights football games. Take your local high school, capacity at their stadium for about 3,000 occupants. At $10 a ticket, I believe they currently charge for Friday night football games at high schools. That's $30,000 that the school generates in gross ticket sales. Not to mention the amount of money that they also produce in concession sales, spiritware sales, and what have you. Taking that same concept of the Friday night lights with a $10 ticket, holding benefit concerts at the on campus at schools, the same $30,000 of possible gross ticket generation sales, plus concessions, raffle, etc., for fundraising. A public school could easily obtain anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 just in one benefit concert at their school. Now, if it was held in conjunction with one of the local colleges that can handle an excess of 20 or 30,000 in attendance, you can see that one single event could help generate a gross revenue of over $200,000 for a public school. One of the reasons that this is difficult, though, is the fact that from a tax deduction point of view, performers are unable to lower their rates because you're not able to claim your time spent performing as a community service, therefore a tax deductible donation, if you would. So if the state were to come up with a system for performers that they could get a tax donation for donated concerts, utilizing it in a fair market value that they could deduct, you would be able to see a dramatic increase in the amount of performers that would be willing to perform at our public schools to help raise money for our children, for our future. One of the reasons why I suggest this is one of the things that I have dabbled in over the last 7 years, which has helped me raise over hundreds of thousands of dollars for Southern California schools, libraries, and nonprofit organizations. One thing that brings people in the communities together is music. It doesn't matter what your background is, your ethnicity, your financial status. Music is one of those few things in life that brings people together. And when it's for a great cause like our public schools, in the education of our children, you'd be amazed at how prompt people are to want to help. A lot of schools don't consider this as an option because they wouldn't know where to begin. Feel free to reach out to me. By the way, I have been blessed with the opportunity to work with almost 36 different Rock and Roll Hall of Famers alone that live here in San Diego County, and have set up benefit concerts throughout Southern California for schools and libraries and nonprofits to help them raise money for their organizations. And it's a great way to bring the community together. So it's a win-win for both the schools and the communities and the performers as well. A final proposed funding solution that I have for the California public school system, it's a little bit of a controversial topic, and a lot of politicians wouldn't touch this, but it's the marijuana industry. Now, I'm not proposing that the marijuana industry helps fund the public schools, but redesigning the marijuana industry for the banking. You're talking current marijuana industry is a 95% plus cash business. The declared yearly revenue generated in just the state of California alone is $6 to $8 billion of taxable revenue. When you're dealing with a 95% to 100% cash industry, you're not seeing the true numbers on the sales. The true sales figures generated, the gross revenue would be well in excess of over $10 billion a year, thus leaving the state missing out on several $billions of taxable revenue a year. What I propose, and we'll be discussing in greater detail in our next episode of Get Busy with Bradley Zink, is offering banking through the local and statewide credit unions, with the state insuring certificates of deposit for the marijuana industry, and in return having the marijuana industry, from the dispensaries to the growers to the distributors, working off of a state-run point of sale system to offer up the certificate of deposit insurance through the state, charging a marijuana banking tax of, say, $2.99 per credit card or delivery fee charge, which would produce billions of dollars of additional taxable revenue, which could go directly to the public schools. And again, like I said, we'll be going even more in detail next episode about how I propose redesigning the marijuana industry and how it can benefit not only public schools, but the taxpayers at large. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Get Busy with Bradley Zink. I'd like to cue up the in the midst benefit flyer, please. I'd like to again thank our show's community sponsor today, in the MIT 777. I'd like to again mention that they are having a fundraising party on April 30th at Grace Vineyard Church in Oceanside, California. That's at 102 North Freeman Street in Oceanside. It's going to be a free, all ages benefit to help raise money to get the band In the MIT 777 to Nashville in June to headline the Nashville Music Awards. They've been selected to headline. If you're in the neighborhood or don't have anything to do, April 30th, we'd greatly appreciate if you came out and supported the band. That about sums it up for this episode. Next episode, we will be discussing the ways to redesign the marijuana industry, which will bring in an additional $6 to $10 billion of taxable revenue for the state of California. How we're tying in how we can help utilize opening up banking for them will benefit our schools in a fee that we can charge, which, like I said, would generate hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $2 to $3 billion, roughly, in additional funding for our public schools. Again, thank you for tuning in to Get Busy with Bradley Zink, and I'll see you next time. Take care.